I want to take some time to thank you for listening to this presentation. It is really to enlighten us on the past situation and the present status of prosthetics and orthotics in Barbados. We want to look at the current landscape and what challenges may have presented and what opportunities have been gifted to us for a future outlook, and give some solutions on the next step forward for us in Barbados and even regionally, as the Caribbean is becoming an open market with open borders. We'll now look at a short video.
No legs?
Yeah, why?
I thought he still had one. You didn't tell me.
Well, maybe you never asked. That's diabetes. Works fast.
So yes, diabetes moves and advances pretty fast, and I will endeavor to keep this presentation on time equally. But in this ever-changing and fast-paced environment, particularly in healthcare and in P&O in Barbados, we're struggling to keep pace.
No legs?
Yeah, why?
I thought he still had one. You didn't tell me.
Well, maybe you never asked. That's diabetes. Works fast.
So the agenda for this talk will be to look at a definition of scope of what's P&O for those present who may not be aware. We're going to look at the current status, our situation in Barbados, and a little bit further afield. We're going to look at a brief overview of the key challenges and deficits that we have and what opportunities are for innovation and strategic recommendations finally. So everybody knows prosthetics is the sexier arm of P&O. Mainly this is replacement of either an above or below elbow and above or below knee with some sort of external or exoskeletal devices. Orthotics is somewhat more challenging, as any situation can present on a given day with things from cranial remolding for hydrocephaly in newborns to protective helmets for seizures, all the way down to lower limb diabetic footwear or total contact insoles or total contact casting for diabetics, which you will be more au fait with, and everything in between from scoliosis bracing to halo bracing or prophylactic and ligament damage knee braces or even fracture braces. The role of the prosthetist orthist, myself, is for assessment firstly of the patient. Then we're heavily involved in the fabrication of these devices. We'll be looking at fitting and sometimes refitting of bracing. We're looking at maintenance and repair, and definitely follow up with patient and patient care. This is important for enabling mobility and independence, as well as quality of life and end of life care in some instances. So our current situation in Barbados is that in service and in infrastructure is that I have been the lone dual qualified prosthetist orthotist here for about 18 years now. I work and function in the lone public primary healthcare center, which is our Queen Elizabeth Hospital, and I function out in the rehab department as part of a multidisciplinary team with working with physios, working with occupational therapy. We have speech and language, and we're led by a physiatrist. I work very heavily now in the amputee clinic and steadily as part of the diabetic clinic. From the Barbados Health Report of 2023, you would see that through our department, there's a delivery of service for rehab, and through the Queen Elizabeth, this is a public healthcare facility. Services are free at the point of care. However, there is a fee schedule presented. It may be a bit outdated, but I've put it there on the list that anyone can is free to have a look at it. They're free to assess. So orthotics and prosthetic unit forms part of a larger rehab unit, and in 2023, which would be the most up-to-date figures we have, we would have done at least tens of thousands of patient visits, and this information will be available in barbadosparliament.com. Prosthetics and orthotics, it would account for probably 1/5 of that number, and insoles, which would be more applicable to what we're speaking of today, accounts for a volume of 30 to 35% of the workload for P&O. Custom-made orthotics are available in Barbados for foot care via private podiatrists, for example, Comfy Foot Care clinics, but they're also provided through the public healthcare system, through the podiatrists that work in the polyclinic system, and referrals then on to our prosthetic and orthotics unit at the Queen Elizabeth Hospital. So looking regionally at the Caribbean as an overview, services are provided in Trinidad. This is TTOP, and at one point they would have been operating out of Barbados, but these are looking at bigger devices, more prosthetic care. We also have GOPP, which we would probably need to have more up-to-date information on with the passing of Hurricane Melissa. They were established since 1987 and have been rebranded to Jamaica Orthotics and Pedorthotist Care. And we have in St. Lucia a prosthetics and orthotics rehabilitation unit that is subsidized by the United Nations Development Program, the UNDP. We need now to look at information on the lesser known islands, Grenada, St. Kitts and Nevis, those islands that may not readily have a service available. So the market for orthopedic devices within the Caribbean was projected to be 255.6 million for the present year, and there's a growth rate forecast of 6.2 leading into 2030. Regional healthcare and regional efforts have been taken by the Pan American Health Organization, PAHO, and WHO, the World Health Organization, with regards to greater awareness and training. Even this year, they've presented a webinar in P&O standards of care. But some of the key challenges and gaps that are presented here in our region are going to be geographic and our location, the fact that we are separated, our borders are separated by water, so logistics, it makes logistics very difficult. It's the high cost of the devices and the heavily reliance on imports. We don't manufacture anything here in the Caribbean, so everything has to be imported with increasing tariffs and shipping costs. And local manufacturing subsidies would be something that would need to be looked at this point in time. One of the other things is to training and human resources. In order to have this is a specialist area. In order to have that training, persons usually have to travel outside of here. We can have local training in terms of technicians. However, in order to be recognized on an international platform, training outside and mainly into Europe or European continent or into the US is a must. Further to those 2 points, the human resources and our logistics, one of the other key things is the technology and the applicability to our region. Most of these things are with myoelectric and processors, which would have issues with corrosion here locally. We would have issues with maintaining these electrical devices. We would have issues with the contact with person's skin and sweating and chemical burns maybe, and replacement and repair of these devices will become an issue as well. And one of the final issues is going to be funding for this. Prosthetics and orthotics is a very expensive arena, so funding for such public health care within the limited budget that's presented already, it is really a fight to battle things like pediatrics or emergency care. We're always going to be one step behind. So some opportunities that would have presented here now in 2025 would be for sure with the opening of borders, pooling of resources, pooling of either human resources as we're able to travel visa-free through other Caribbean countries, and pooling of resources in terms of funding. It would be at this point that we could look at having a central manufacturing hub for our insoles, our further for other devices, and then dispersing them throughout the Caribbean. This would be really a good time to open up discussion on, say, things like 3D printing for sockets, 3D printing for insoles, having a regional hub, and then dispersing or dispensing or distribution of these things into the wider Caribbean. And this would help with subsidizing and also going towards low cost manufacturing. It would help with possibly, if we're pooling resources, standard of care and the potential for better data collection, knowing what each country is doing, and then using this as part of our marketing towards our numbers, towards gaining the traction we need in a open world market. So nearing the end, what we're going to look at strategic recommendations for both Barbados and the region. We'll look at mapping existing capacity and identifying all prosthetic and orthotic services in Barbados in the public and the private, because we do have quite a few practitioners, even including myself, practicing privately on island and in other islands and neighboring islands. So to understand the gaps in service and where referral pathways, we need to build local fabrication and repair capacity by establishing or enhancing our local P&O labs, and to reduce dependency on imports and shorten the turnaround time, and to reduce the cost as well. We need to look at training our workforce, invest in training process orthotics technicians as well, and continuing education with our international partners. We need to look at adopting a quality standard, align our local services with the WHO, World Health Organization, with the ISPO, International Society of Prosthetics and Orthotics, for the standards that P&O would require to ensure that devices are safe, of a specific quality, and durable. We need to look at funding and subsidizing of funding. I would like to veer away from philanthropic efforts. I think that leads us into down a rabbit hole, a path of not sustainability. So we need to look at funding that is going to be always readily available at the point of when we need it, and integrate this into our public health care, possibly the insurance scheme as well. As we're having an aging population, we need to look towards sustainable funding for diseases that are going to come with non-communicable diseases, complications that come with that, and with our aging population. Finally, we need to look again at our data collection and research, and use this to leverage this against our supply and demand with distributors. We need to look at regional collaboration and leveraging Caribbean networks to share resources, training, procurement, and possibly central manufacturing hub that I alluded to before. And we need to keep this as a patient-centered care and rehabilitation. At some point, we begin to make P&O and healthcare sound as if it's a business, but we need to always remember that at the heart of this, there's a patient. So we're doing this for better patient care and for better outcomes for the patient. We want to ensure that the prosthetics and orthotic service is readily integrated into rehab for a better holistic outcome for the patient. So just to summarize, our data before would have shown that P&O forms over 2.5 million budget annually, and it is projected to grow. So we're looking at a budget or projected market of 3.5 million in the year 2030. So we need to garner our figures and look and work towards that. We need to look heavily at advancements in 3D printing and modular prosthetics, and maybe tele follow-ups. We need to move into the future. We see the trends in more developed countries, and we can take from that pros and cons, look at the pros and see what is applicable to us here in the Caribbean, adapting the devices and at reduced costs and increase accessibility for us here in the Caribbean, and with market growth and technology advances, the potential for improved prosthetics and orthotic service in this region appears to be promising. So I just want to leave you with a thought that service delivery and service development and strengthening P&O will increase and support inclusion, mobility, return to employment, quality of life, better end of life care for persons with limb loss or orthopedic or diabetic needs in both Barbados and the Caribbean. So this can only be a win for public healthcare service. It can only be a win for the region. It can only be a win for the patients that we are serving. I thank you for listening.